All right. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Skylar, and we are Miriam, AJ, Ria, waiting for Bonnie, and possibly Nora, though Nora comes and goes, and at her own, by her own, at her whim. And so we don't know, but could be. We could have an appearance from Nora. Probably many of you are pop-up school students, so am I. And it is a surprise to the four of us that Bonnie isn't here yet today. So our teacher hasn't walked into the classroom, is my feeling. That's the feeling I'm having. But we've been doing this high-pitched conversation for a long time now. Does anyone know when we started?
About 6 months ago, maybe.
Yeah,
I
I
have
think so.
from Bonnie. She says she'll be here for another 5 minutes.
In another
In
5 minutes. Okay, great. Okay. So we can just throw spitballs and just kidding. People even know what that is anymore. Um, but I will introduce the topic and we'll and the format and maybe say a couple words. What I was going to say was we originally did this high pitch session at the STOA, and I think we did 2 or 3 sessions live with an audience or people participating as you are today. And then we took it offline and we weren't quite sure what we were going to do with the conversations, but we continued to have them. So we've been meeting as a group every 2 weeks, having these spontaneous, emergent conversations, just really allowing the topics to arise and really relaxing into and falling into deep conversation with each other about these topics. And we've been in a consistent state of inquiry about what to do with them. Until recently, we felt like we were ready to go public again, and Bonnie recommended that we put it up at the pop-up school, and we liked that idea. So here we are. Very happy to have you, to see you, those of you we can see. And the format we propose, and I don't know, maybe Bonnie will change it when she gets here, but was just that we would have the conversation. The topic, as you all know, probably, but maybe I'll repeat it: how aversion, repulsion, and decay and death can help us wake up to life. And this is a topic that we, 2 weeks ago, we sort of stumbled into this topic, and it felt really alive and very rich for all of us. And so we decided to introduce the topic again and see where we can all get to collectively. So yeah, we'll speak for a while, and then we'll happily take questions or comments. So yeah, I think, is that a good intro? Please jump in, anyone, if I forgot something.
Bonnie's arriving right now, so I'll just give her a moment to settle.
Okay.
But then I think we can dive right in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Hi, Bonnie. There you are. Sky just introduced topic and sort of structure of our call, and so we're ready to dive in. I'll maybe start just with a short little bit. I live in British Columbia, Canada, and so at this point in the seasons, the leaves have all fallen down, and we're sort of in that bleakest time of the year called November, where there's a lot of rain and fog and a lot of grey, and there isn't yet that sparkle of snow that kind of charms me every year, even if I dread it before it happens. And I've just really this year, more so than ever, maybe also because a dear friend passed away 2 weeks ago, I've just been feeling like November is such an invitation, at least in this part of the planet, to reckon with, to meet, to let death actually work on us, rather than to try and avoid it or sort of cancel it out or distract myself from it. So it's been just a beautiful contemplation for me, even watching the absolute full glory of the fall leaves, and then dropping, literally like dropping a dress or dropping the cloak down, and then seeing these bare branches with a bright red circle or a bright orange circle around, and then that slowly turning into brown, and then everything really being quite colorless at this point. So I just wanted to offer that in as a maybe more a connection between nature, human, and I think part of me feels like the themes that we're holding today is actually the awakening through these themes of repulsion, decay, death is about not turning away, but turning toward these themes and then seeing what actually comes through us or through the contemplation.
I'll share something that I was thinking about. We didn't talk about it last week when we were preparing, but I remember once, this was where I used to live. The cats, one of the cats had brought in a hummingbird, right? Like this hummingbird that was dead. And I put it on some paper towel and put it on like a little ledge because I wanted to show Sandy because of the way the iridescence is, you know, like you turn it one way, it looks green, and I didn't want to be morbid or anything. It was a very beautiful thing, but I forgot about it. And then not months, maybe 3 weeks later, I mean, quite a while later, I was kind of cleaning around that ledge and there it was. And what happened is it was filled with worms, and because it died, the worms came out of it. And I had this it was like a vision, and I just stared at it, and all I could think of was there was a worm that wanted to come out of me. Like there was some kind of a gnawing or a knowing or a unsaid something. I just felt like the universe was reflecting some fundamental state or condition I was in at the time. I can't remember the circumstances, whether I was working on a paper or in between stuff, but I remember holding that. Yeah, I remember the visual of it. I don't really remember the context, what was actually kind of the obstacle that I was struggling with at the time.
I can pick it up from the dead animals. And in our last conversation, we were talking about, or I was talking about seeing a dead rat in my garden because they were eating all the chicken food. And so I put in some toxin or poison, how would you say that? And it turned out there were quite a lot there because the poison would disappear day after day after day. And I'm like, okay. And so this weekend, I was cleaning up around the kitchen coop and doing away with the nettles. And of course, a dead rat again, and another one, and another one. And that we talked about last time about that first reaction of like, ooh, like, ugh. And now I'm more like, I killed these animals. That's what I did. I mean, that was very, I mean, it was conscious in a way. It was with a goal. And yeah, I killed these animals. That was, I mean, from that initial repulsion to actually beautiful little animals. And I killed them. And probably more than I saw. I saw 3 this time. So I noticed the evolution in my own, how I was relating with it. Yeah. and it's the only poison I use on the vegetables and anything, the whole garden, but I do use it. And so it's basically that, how it can change if you become aware of it, like as we talked about it, that initial repulsion, and then okay, this is how it is now, and this is what I did. Yeah, peace is back.
I appreciate you bringing that up, Leah, because it makes this connection quite apparent for me that my everyday existence is very much, not so consciously, but very much unconsciously contributing to the death of so much life around me. From, just driving my child to the school, that's 30 minutes drive each way, to, just having to cook every day and having to make some choices that are detrimental when you stop to think of it to our environment in the production of them. Just the usual stuff I pick up from the supermarket. Every time I put a piece of plastic into the trash, because a huge amount of it is not officially recycled, and we're learning that even of what is officially recycled, or so we think, 70% of it is not getting recycled. I think of mushrooms. I say inside me or outside, out loud sometimes, like mushrooms, hoping that we will tap into this mushroom technology that will help us bring more harmony into our use of this level of plastic in the world. Yeah, like there's a very, very intimate relationship between aversion and being alive. For me on a daily basis, this is what it's bringing up in me. I feel a lot of aversion, even just to my way of being, or, just having to live in modern society. And this urge to want to live well. To what extent I will go to live well. Yeah, I'm not sure how to bring it together, but yeah, there's an intimate relationship between these two on a moment-to-moment basis. Maybe these thoughts are coming up because I'm watching this free summit on gut immune solution. It's called gutimmunesolution.com, I think. And yeah, it's disturbing. And then again, like, why am I watching that? I don't want to get cancer. There's that aversion. I don't want to get COVID. Yeah. And then Miriam, you were saying last time, well, so what? We have COVID. We have one more thing that we can die of in the world. Like, what is this level of global panic, hysteria, and totalitarianism around it that is happening? So what? We have one more thing that we can die from in the world. Can someone take it from here?
I'm just noticing that how many stories are arising as soon as the topic is opened, like the topic of death is opened. I can feel how suppressed, how I long to be telling these stories and sharing these kinds of stories more often, the stories of the rats and the stories of the hummingbird worms. and many others, and others that some of you shared before. And I like, that's just my first noticing as we start the conversation, is how I just want to tell you all stories about how all these near death kinds of experiences that I've witnessed, even in the past week since we last talked about the topic. And I will share one because it just happened this weekend, and it was, it just really brought the topic front and center for me. But I think you're right, AJ. I love that you point out that it's a moment to moment consideration, like the intimacy, it's always there. And this story and some of the others that are coming to mind for me also point to this, like how close death is at all times. And so this weekend, some people visited the farm, and they brought their dog, family pet, and the chickens were out when they arrived. And they put the dog on the leash, and, you know, it was kind of hanging out and checking out the chickens, but the owner was like, oh, you know, she doesn't care, she won't, it will be fine, you know. And I was like, I've seen this before, like some dogs don't care about the chickens, and some go, like it's like a switch flips, and then there's no stopping them. And so he took the dog off the leash, and she immediately went for one of the chickens, and they just like flew around the yard, and the dog, around the backside of the coop, the dog got the chicken. And I was kind of frozen. I mean, this was what was interesting to me was everybody's response. And my daughter was there, and she's 11, and she loves these chickens. She takes care of these chickens. She did the thing we told her not to do, which was to name the chickens. And so she knows these chickens, and her face, I was watching her, and she was just like, stop it. And it was kind of out of our hands. Except one woman who works on the farm came and ran over, and she scooped up the chicken, looked dead. And she thought it was dead, but she scooped it up, and then it came back. It was sort of playing dead, which I didn't know chickens did. But the horror, Eleanor kept saying, is she alive? Is she alive? Is she alive? And ultimately this chicken was fine. I cannot believe it. But it just lost some feathers. But I really thought we were gonna, I was like debating, it was like the quickness of all the thoughts that were happening. And I was really debating. I told her at one point, I said, turn away. But even that, I felt like, because I could see she wanted to see. And so I was like, no, look, whatever you want to do, like, this is just what's happening. And she kept saying, is she dead? And I was just like, I don't know. I don't know. Of course, it was a great relief when she wasn't, but we have lost chickens before. And, you know, it was very exciting. Everybody's heart was racing, blood was pumping, you know, like it really changed the atmosphere of the visit even. And so, and as some of you may know, we've moved from the city a year ago, and she grew up in the city. And, you know, we just had a nice conversation about how that is part of life on the farm, that the life, death, life circle is just more present for us now. And I'm really grateful for that. And yeah, I think that, yeah, I guess I just feel grateful to be able to share that story, and just back to this feeling all the stories that come up for me around the topic.
I was, as you were saying how you just like to tell and hear stories, I was like, that feels like such a healthy move, because instead of then turning away from this topic in a way, we're turning towards it, right? Even just in this small way of hearing stories that are not about bright flowers and sunshine, we're actually talking about rats and worms coming out of hummingbirds. And I can even feel my initial repulsion when I even list those topics that we've just talked about right now. And I was thinking, yesterday I talked to my parents here in Switzerland, and they have 4 chickens. They only have 3 now because they got them at the beginning of COVID. My nephew insisted they needed chickens for food security. And so he's 17, he got them chickens. They've been eating eggs since then. But he also insisted that since he's a meat eater, he would kill one of these chickens and go through the entire process himself. And he just did that last week. So he got his older brother to hold the chicken, and then he killed the chicken. And and then he did the entire thing until the chicken was frozen, and then they ended up eating it. And I was listening to the story, and I could feel, even my body was going, I was imagining my two nephews killing the chicken, and part of me was like literally kind of hunching over while my mom was talking, because I was feeling that, repulsion. And then last night I ate some chicken, and it was so present that we pretend we're not intimately connected with decay and death, and yet, like you were saying, Itche, we are constantly. So to me, it's not are we or are we not? We are always. It's more, are we actually noticing it? And are we allowing ourselves to be present with not just the repulsion, but also the beauty of it and the curiosity about it and the turning away and the turning towards, like, to me, it's like we don't need to have one clean slot of how we deal with this. We can actually, or I'm feeling that invitation in myself, just open up to, it's actually okay to both feel the good taste of the chicken at night and feel the repulsion in the morning when I hear about a chicken getting killed, and feel the curiosity and kind of the almost like strange interest when I hear about worms coming out of a dead hummingbird, and feel a bit of repulsion at the same, like the whole thing. So I was thinking about this theme of how can us being present with much more the bigger array that comes up, rather than shutting off from any of it, help us wake up more. And to me, it's because somehow we talk about decay and death, but life is like right there. So there's no way to really come fully alive without, being surrendered to November. I think that's at least my embodied experience right now.
It sounds like a Bee Gees tune.
To take this one step further, because we are talking about the dark stuff, right? I don't have to apologize for, and what I'm noticing is that it's one thing to talk about nature and the death and the destruction, and I like this notion of taking responsibility for having killed the rats when the rats were no longer disgusting. I mean, that's even more amazing. But what I'm noticing is, like, my felt sense of the question changes when I think of all the wars and people dying, and I mean, I don't live in an area where I see people killing each other, let's say. But I noticed that I frame like what people do to each other in a different way. I noticed that unless I step back and purposively see it as nature, all this other stuff comes in, like different value systems and justification systems, and the expectation that people are free and free agents that have choice, and the violence between people is related to all of that. And I'm just noticing how just noticing that difference, like when I bring in yeah, I'm not trying to make a point, but just noticing that the conversation in my head switches.
I hear your cognitive dissonance, if that's, can we say that? In the
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if I think of the dog killing the chicken or any other scenario, that, and I see it as nature. And then if I think of, like, Muslims and Hindus fighting. I'm just noticing all the justification systems that come in, which doesn't come in with the dog and the chicken. Only the experience of being scared, or, you know, these kind of raw emotions come in, but not these justification systems. And I was just noticing that they kind of live in different domains. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, that's curious, Bonnie. It just brings to mind a comment that a friend of mine who works with in traumatized in areas where there have been natural disasters. He'll go in after the Red Cross and like the first responders, then his group will come in and work with children, a lot of times children or people who are affected by the event, and sort of help them to work through some of the traumatic response in the body, the somatic piece. And he once said, so he had done this around the world after tsunamis and natural disasters, and then Sandy Hook happened. He's in Connecticut, and he said that the experience when the violence was perpetrated by other humans is somehow different and harder to make sense of, or that was sort of what I got from the way he described his work in these. And it really stayed with me, because I could feel in myself how that could be true, that if there was, I mean, for God forbid, but forest fire or, some kind of a natural disaster affecting my family, I think I would make sense of it in a different way than if there was some human to human violence perpetrated.
I am making the connection between how I'm okay with this, the idea of that, say, happening to animals or even to myself a little more than I am okay with it to like some children I've never met, or my own child for that matter. And I am a kind of person who's so agitated or so scared of such a thing, especially when it comes to my child, that I find that the only way I make peace with it is to fully accept that it can happen. And the only way I seem to be able to do that is through this. Some 20 plus years ago, I could call him my first teacher on the path. He told this story about how I am just like a sand particle in the whole of cosmos, and who cares if I live or die, which wasn't meant to diminish my value as a being. It was more meant to free me up and to live more vicariously, I suppose. And it worked for me. Like I do go back to that, remembering that whether I live or die, will not make a huge difference in the overall existence and the life cycles or the fate or the destiny of planet Earth or humans, etc. That's kind of relieving for me, which then gives me courage to, do crazier things that I generally cannot do when left to my own devices or my own upbringing of having to be perfect, not daring to fail or try something new, because I grew up in French education and whatnot. I guess this is a cliche one, but I wanted to bring it up because last time we were speaking about this, what stayed with me from that conversation was about how I don't remember how we got into that conversation, but how we were talking about decision making, or it's not even decision per se, but like how we take our next steps in the world, allowing those steps to come from a more organic, less personal place. I don't know if any of you can recall that conversation and can jump in. I would love to bring that up.
I cannot recall that specific. I mean, I recall the conversation, HA. I don't remember how we got there, but I'm just going to invite us to open the space. It's a small group, and it feels like probably others are feeling that urge to share stories or share their experience and turn towards the topic also. So please do. I don't have a suggestion for a protocol except just speak. Bonnie, how do you propose we handle?
Well, we have a couple of topics, let's say, in the chat already.
Okay.
So we have something from Sharon. Sharon, did you want to unpack your reflection there first? That'd be great.
I don't know. It's a little ways back, but somebody was talking about noticing how they felt different things. I think it was the chicken story, and I just remember sort of waking up to that at some point in my, I don't know, probably late 20s, that things people thought were good, I had mixed reactions to, and things people thought were bad, I had mixed reactions to, and feeling strange about that until I sort of went into allowance about it. And it just really unlocked a lot more richness, I think, in how I relate to life, and a lot more equanimity, maybe, because there's there's possibility for feeling all kinds of different ways in any situation, like it's going to funerals and being delighted with, seeing your relatives. Nobody wants to be there under those circumstances, but there's always, a smile or a laughter or a gratitude or something. And I think that, I don't know, without acknowledging that ambivalence, we're cut off from a lot of potentially wonderful experiences.
Yeah, so that kind of triggers me because I hate funerals. I'd rather see a dead body than, I mean, talk about aversion. I'm very repulsed by the embalmed body. And I'm, so this is obviously my thing. But it's just, not only because it's so odd looking, but I just feel like it's like disrespectful of the body, and I don't know. Yeah. So when my father died, he didn't want to be embalmed, and we all promised him just to have a closed casket, but my mom had him embalmed and the whole thing, and I didn't go look. So that's interesting you bring it up, because yeah, that's a tough one for me.
But I like this this naming of the range of emotions that are possible in any given experience, like what's appropriate or not appropriate. I mean, it gets funny again when you have a child that's like a new lens on things, because children will have inappropriate reactions to things all the time. And often they're expressing what's going unexpressed. otherwise, it's like they're looking like none of the adults are expressing whatever the inappropriate emotion is, or the emotion that's not invited to the table. And yeah, and I find myself in that space a lot around trying to, there's this voice that's like, probably shouldn't trust. It's like socializing voice. It's like, we're at a funeral, she can't be laughing, or whatever it is. And then the one that wants her to be able to express, to know that this is perfectly natural, whatever she's feeling has space. But yeah, I mean, a part of I can really relate, I think, Sharon, because it feels like a part of my detoxification from acculturation has been like really expressing emotions. And there were a lot that were pent up for a long time. And even this morning, we were in a store or in a public space, and I laugh very loudly. And this really embarrasses my daughter. And, we were in like an orthodontist waiting room. And she said, could you please stop cackling? And I was like, you can't tell a witch to stop cackling. And she said, well, you can tell them, but they won't do it. I was like, yep, you got it. But yeah, that kind of like how the culture prevents us from really moving through and having those feelings. And I imagine, I liked when you wrote the comment, Sharon. Originally, you said something about the ambivalence and like leading. Yeah, there's like a way, I think, on a deep level, we can start feeling nothing about these things, because those voices and that conditioning from our own parents or from the culture just generally are so deep that it's like the whatever the inappropriate emotion is arises, and then it doesn't even see the light of day. So yeah, thank you.
Gosh, I'm feeling like how life really keeps inviting us to not feel less and less to make it okay, but actually to feel more and more. And that in a weird way, at the end, things sort of seem more okay, but only if we give in to that invitation. And I was really reminded of that, Sky, when you were talking about becoming a mother, and thinking how I would do anything that my daughter doesn't die prematurely. And ever since I've become a mother, I don't want to die. Like, it's become much stronger. Like, I cannot die for a long time. I need to be there. I mean, this is a really strong force in me. And every time she does her adventures of mountain biking and snowboarding and hiking in the mountains and all these wild things she keeps doing, I'm kind of counting the hours until she's back home. It's just safe, back in the house. And so I feel like it's this juxtaposition that keeps living in me of life, I feel, being so extraordinary that I want more and more of it, and at the same time death being an immediate intimate aspect of it that I have to embrace. And same with what you were saying, Itcha. It's like I comfort myself as being a grain of sand, but I know that's not the whole truth. To me, that's not the whole truth. It's like, yes, I'm a tiny grain of sand, and I fucking matter a whole bunch. And so does each of us here on this call. And it's to me, the invitation is, can I hold both of those? And that's more puzzling to me and harder to encompass. Is I'm nothing, and I wouldn't say I'm everything, but I matter. Like, I matter and I'm nothing. And so this whole conversation, I can feel that it keeps stretching me to basically encompass more and even more intensity. Like, I think I said last time we spoke, watching the wrinkles upon wrinkles upon wrinkles in my grandmother's face before she died, and then seeing this lit up light in those tiny blue eyes. And it felt like the extremes of everything's falling apart and something is more alive than it ever was. And that's kind of that's the movement I feel like at least I'm drawn to be able to. Same with like Bonnie, when you were talking about the embalming and the covering up and the kind of making nice with a cute little bow, the death, I was at a friend's funeral, and the wife, who's a very close friend of mine, and this is in the, in the bush of Canada, and it was such a homegrown funeral with just a wooden box that was built by the neighborhood, and then the guys carrying the dead body of this dear friend through the forest lane, and all of us just walking alongside and singing our hearts out and crying at the same time. And then a hole in the earth, and it was a hole, and it was dirt piles, and we all took shovels and we threw dirt on it, and the rain was coming down and there was lightning. It felt so surreal and so stark and so wild and crazy, and it felt so healing and so extraordinarily right. And so there's this, I keep repeating myself, there's something about the muchness and the turning towards that I feel is the clue to actually coming into, for me, some sort of okayness with the craziness of this existence that I cannot get when I just stay in this feeling or that feeling, or this, if I just stay in one of the little places.
Yeah, and I just want to tag on that, because now you've helped me remember why that, I mean, they upset me in general, but that with my father upset me, is because we have a lot of burials here, and we put the cats in these little balsam clementine boxes with, and it's so genuine, and it's so just, and then we dig the hole ourselves, and there's all this, it's not, there's meaningful ritual that you share, and that was not available with this ceremony. And yeah, that's so thank you for that. That's I have an inherent compare and contrast of how we've always dealt with death at the farm. Yeah.
I actually have an invitation for David if he wants to share something about being in close to people dying. It's an invitation.
Is the invitation close to other people dying or dying myself?
I was thinking about the process you had with your wife. That's what I know about. Wondering if you want to, if there's something that comes up.
Well, yeah, I don't know what I'm going to say, but it did come up with Benita and I recently as well. And as I was sitting here, the question I had was, does anything really disappear? And the other thing I was sitting with was something that came up with Sky last week, was that the culture I'm in is about leaning back from rather than leaning into. So as I was sitting here leaning into death, how close I was to death once, and holding my wife as she died, and the possibility of me dying, or my children, or my grandchildren, or the rats that I killed. What came up for me, and it's coming up for me again, is this: how do I tend to the sorrow of the wars that were brought up, that are going on right here as we sit in this privilege of being connected through the internet? They're bombing each other. So allowing myself to lean into trying to understand all that dynamic that Miriam was talking about, the vastness of it all, and just allowing myself to try to digest it, not to understand it, because I'm not going to understand it. And even if I do right here and now, by tomorrow, it'll change. To try and let my heart and my gut, you know, as I leaned into even this call, I noticed that if I let my stomach come forward, that's not my normal bodily position. I'm usually trying to look good and hold my stomach in. If I let my stomach just come out and my shoulders come toward the vastness of death, there's a relaxation, there's an okayness with it. I don't know where all that came from, Ria, but thanks for that invitation. You know, oh, so I do want to just share, Bonnie, when I shared, I know what it was. Oh God, it was so great, Bonnie. The guy fishing on the river. And when I saw the trailer to that on the pop-up school, I had this slight, ever so slight shift that my wife wasn't gone. She was now in the universe with me. And what Bonnie noticed when I said that was she heard my wife laughing. So does anything really disappear?
Yeah, and the line in that video trailer is, I'm haunted by them today, as I'm haunted by the waters. Yeah, and it's the movie A River Runs Through It, which is a fantastic movie. So there's an interesting comment in, you know, I don't think we've specified it yet, but so you know, here's repulsion and death and aversion, and then here's the dark aspect of it. You look at it and it's dark and sad, and then here's the blue eyes simply shining. Yeah, that's interesting what's going on, you know, like they're both in play at the same time, I think. I suppose there's a question about suicide, and I don't have suicidal thoughts, but my uncle committed suicide, and my other two cousins tried, well, eventually did because they were crazy, but and I think those two sides are there, like for people who commit suicide, right? It's the incredible pain of wanting to live, and then the promise of being dead, that there's something, there has to be something like a promise in it, or something, or else you'd be too depressed to kill yourself, you know what I mean? I think there's when my father was dying, he was very, his prognosis was like he was supposed to live for a year, and he lived for 12 years, but he was having lots of mini strokes. He was a crazy person. He'd go bowling, and he had so many strokes that he would throw the bowling ball into the wrong lanes and all this stuff, you know. But he he didn't want us, my mother and my sister are both nurses. He didn't want to be taken to the hospital. So the first time he almost died, they did take him to the hospital. And the second time he didn't call my mom, you know, like first time he called my mom down so she could just be with him. And then the second time she just found him dead. And she said, I wonder why he didn't call me down. I said, because he took him to the hospital last time. So he was like, he was really very ready. Yeah, I think people when they're dying, I know this is true when I think of myself dying, I don't really get upset about dying. I get upset about like, I'll never see my horses again and who's going to take care of my horse. You know, this thing that you guys are describing about your children. It's always like a little bit of narcissism about like if I'm not around, then the universe is not going to just go on and someone will take my horses. And except that we know that happens all the time. People die and then things go on. The living go on living.
Yeah, I'm really that image of the grandmother's sparkling blue eyes, the little blue eyes, really is so powerful. And it just, maybe it's obvious, but it feels like, you know, in the presence of death, the sacredness of life becomes very much more apparent. And yeah, that feels true. And it's like, I think I said this last time, but it's like a birth and a death. These are two times when, if you're witnessing them, you know there's nowhere else you should be. Like if anyone's sat at a deathbed or attended a birth, like these passages are so, something is happening beyond the ordinary, way beyond the ordinary. And as that transition between worlds, as I see it, happens one way or the other, it's like such a rarefied atmosphere, like such a sacred space. And, you know, it's really a shame. It's so sad that we've tried to and have succeeded mostly at sanitizing both processes. I had my daughter at home, and that was it was really important to me to have her at home. And it was a pretty harrowing experience, but we made it. But death was very present, you know, the possibility of it, et cetera. And I think there was a beautiful share there. Cheryl shared a beautiful passage about women and birth and death. And, you know, it is often the female who gets assigned these passages, you know, of this. I was thinking this morning about all these goddesses that represent both war and love, you know, or like the wrath and the, it's like the Morrigan. I've just started reading this book about the Morrigan. It's like, she's like the nightmare queen. Like she's this terrifying kind of figure and beloved by the people. So it's like, again, like reconciling these polarities. And there's this, I don't know, idea or thought or truth that I've been playing with, that the heart is the place where we can hold polarities, that the mind is really baffled by these kinds of polarities. It can't really hold them, but the heart is the place where the paradox is resolved. And so, yeah, so I just feel like the sacredness of life is just so present in the presence of death. And maybe what if we flipped it, you know, in the presence of life, like at that birthing experience, maybe the inevitability of death, or the fill in the blank of death, like that would be cool to figure out what that is. The sacredness of death is present also.
I'm reminded of I was at this online memorial for this friend, and one of his dearest and closest and long-term friends at one point, because it was very solemn and sincere, but very somber and serious. And at one point, this close friend of his invited everyone in to just say, like, he just blew up the energy in a way, because he just invited everyone to unmute themselves and just put out how thankful they are for this soul to have been on earth and who knows where now. And he laughed and he laughed and he laughed, and it was such a different energy. And similarly, when a friend died maybe a decade ago, and I was telling a neighbor, and the first thing they said is, he's free now. And I remember my cognitive dissonance in that moment and how it has stayed with me, because it kind of wobbled my structure of, and I'm thinking of, I think it was Ronan who said, why, as soon as we start talking about death, do we go into sort of the darkness piece? How about the other, not to replace the darkness, but just again to expand what is? And one practice I've been doing since, as I'm getting older, more and more people that I love are dying, is to at least hold for myself, and maybe it is just a comfort, but I'm going to put it out here. It sort of resonates with, I think it was David, you said this, who says they're gone, is somehow with each person who I love dying, somehow whatever is beyond becomes friendlier to me. It feels friendlier. It feels like it's getting populated, whatever that is, by more and more essences, souls, beings. It feels like the welcoming the welcoming party for the next person just becomes more and more friendly. So I thought I'd just put that out again, just to try and hold the juxtapositions and bring in some of the, wow, we could be laughing wholeheartedly at a funeral as well as weeping uncontrollably. I mean, the two could actually exist, and we don't need to keep chopping it into one slice or the other slice.
I've had that experience of thinking about dying, not in a gruesome way, and having that feeling of freedom come, it often happens to me when I think of the fact that I don't have children, and I have this enormous sense of freedom, like I've removed from the karmic wheel, like this sense. So, and then I start to think, and then when I die, then it's over. What is like, isn't that what the last words on the cross was? It's done, or something like that. And I get this wonderful sense. I mean, it's obviously a thought experiment, but I do get this sense of like, I want that. Like I just want, I have a big freedom kind of, a big freedom type of person anyways. And so it just seems to me like, yeah, like the icing on the cake at the end of the world.
Just to tag onto that, Bonnie, that's exactly what happened when I was holding my wife. That's a simple statement. It was a very large experience in that there was a connection, a deep love at that instance that we experienced with each other. But the medical personnel there characterized what they observed as being rigor mortis, her shaking. I sensed, and I will never lose, her sighing in relief where she became that freedom. I don't know if I have tears of joy or tears of sadness saying that, but go on, Bonnie.
The saddest death I ever witnessed was my first horse's death. And I've been pretty good about like understanding when it's time to euthanize other animals. And a lot of my animals have had horribly weird things, but they're not in pain. So I'm not averse to that. But this horse, I told people what his problem was. Half my friends said, don't put him through it. It's awful. And half my friends gave me stories of how their horse lived forever. And it was a mistake. What we had to do to try to intervene was horrible. And I ended up killing him because I gave him way too much pain medication. And the night he was going to die, I knew he was going to die, and I closed the stall and I locked it. And so that was actually the worst death I ever witnessed. And to this day, I mean, I blame myself. I try not to, but it was a mistake. This was a big mistake. By the time the second horse, I wasn't in a rush, but I didn't have this. I couldn't weigh it. Horses can be very stoic, so it didn't have this, and then he's free. The second horse died. It was like, yeah, and then he's free. It was really horrible mistake.
David, I want to thank you for bringing up your experience and how you mentioned the release of the belly, which is also my holding pattern, is like, the allowing of the shoulders to come down and maybe even forward in that gesture to lean in, both of which really allow at the felt sense level to come into relationship very directly, very intimately. Very different way of living than how I normally live, like 90% of my life, 99 possibly. And I just want to highlight that those instructions alone, as simple as they are transformative in my experience and also in what I study deeply. In us directly practicing this relationship between aversion, death, and immediate access to the intelligence and the sacredness of life that is there every moment, from moment to moment. Because for me, at the moment, it takes moment to moment releasing of my belly. And hopefully in time, when you do it enough, it becomes a new rewiring, a new pathway that can over time become your dominant holding structure in your body. So I really want to thank you for bringing that up. Made the whole difference for me in this call. Thank you. Thanks for sharing your experience with your wife. What a sacred experience you've had. And the closest thing, and the very similar experience I've had, is with my dog, my German Shepherd of 13 years. It was debilitating to come to that decision to euthanize her, that we had to do it. But I remember the moment she got the injection, and I had my hands on her, and it still brings tears to my eyes. But instead of feeling sadder the moment she passed, I actually felt her release. I felt her lightness. I don't know, you could call it freedom, I suppose. So I had that experience, which sounds maybe similar to yours. Thanks for sharing that too.
Yeah, just checking in with Zach. Zach, did you want to share?
Yeah, thanks. I'm really appreciative of all y'all hosting this conversation. I've been just paying attention to, yeah, feeling it all. It's quite deep, obviously. I wanted to add more energy to, after Bonnie mentioned the hard death of her first horse. There's this thing that we've been exploring on the call around death can be quite sad. It also can be quite beautiful. It points to the sacredness of life. It enables freedom. So there's this question about is death good or not? And that's a real question, actually, because there's a strong subcultural movement to postpone death indefinitely. Or actually, I mean, just in the medical system, there's a strong mainstream cultural movement, but there's a strong subcultural movement in kind of tech humanist space to postpone death and inevitably eliminate it. And this willingness to commit to that project is considered courageous, insightful and courageous, and straightforward. So Bonnie mentioning a hard death that is tragic forces this kind of question about are all deaths good, or only some deaths good? Would it be better what would we lose if we lost death? If we lost physical death of an individual, would we lose a sacredness that couldn't be retrieved? Would there be some other way to retrieve that sacredness or to cultivate it? Yeah, that's what I'm sitting with.
I think that well, sometimes I tell my students like that are kind of preoccupied with in this way, like they can't resolve themselves to death. And I'll just say the problem with that is pretty soon we won't be talking about near-death experiences. People have near-life experiences. Like I'm like, you're suffering from a near-life experience, right? So yeah, there's something about that. When you said that, Zach, it's like, if we could prolong life forever, or, you know, how much are we willing to pay for it? Like, you know, like being in a bubble or having your brain in a box, or like, and one of the things I think is interesting and scary is that when humans do this kind of thing, they start redefining things. Like the definition of having COVID is not whether you have any symptoms, but if you have a strong immune system and you test for COVID, you are the diseased one, right? And so I think as we watch, I mean, not me, this is why, you know, I have a reverse bucket list. Did I ever tell you that? Like, the things that I'm so happy, I'm not going to live to see that. I'm not going to live to see that. I'm not going to, and it makes me really happy. Like, so I have this reverse bucket list. And one of them is watching that unfold, like how much people would be willing to not live in order to never die.
It's you know, as you were speaking, Zach, I was thinking, it's so interesting to consider that our relationship with prolonging or avoiding death immediately affects how we live, like immediately, you know, and I think this is sort of a thread I felt through this whole conversation is we think they're so separate. It's like, oh, I'd like to live and I'd like to avoid death, or I'd like to have this relationship with one or the other. And they are in a way one and the same. Like one cannot exist without the other. Every single moment we've been sitting here on this Zoom call, some of our cells have been rejuvenating and some have been dying. And I feel like, especially in this time of COVID, it's become such a collective, I feel part of how we're responding to COVID has got to do collectively with this absolute avoidance of death. So the how we motivate ourselves in our lives, I just think that's so interesting. It's like how we relate to death affects immediately and intimately how we are motivated to live our lives.
There's a kind of wisdom, like I mean, we all have to answer this question for ourselves. What kind of life is worth living? What kind of life isn't worth living? So we all have to answer it, but there's a certain kind of wisdom I feel like people who have the most to lose can potentially access that, for example, I don't. So I think you, Miriam, were speaking about how when I think your daughter goes on like dangerous trips, you're just waiting for her to come back safely. And so it's like, given how much you value life in those moments, I would want to know, if it was possible, what kind of life you wouldn't wish for your daughter. What kind of life would be so not life that even that wouldn't be worth it for you to wish for her. That's where the rubber hits the road in that kind of question for me.
I love that question. I'm gonna hold that with me. One thing, a friend of mine who was diagnosed with an advanced stage of cancer in January actually just came into full recovery within 7 months. But he said one of the practices he did, and I've been using it, I'm cold plunging, and it's hard for me to do that in the morning, but I'm using his very simple practice. He said he didn't want to just pray for survival because he didn't want to be out of tune with what is actually his timing, which was a mystery to him. But one thing he did feel very confident and comfortable saying is, I am alive, I am alive, I am alive. And I've been doing that when I don't want to get in the cold war. I'm like, why the heck am I doing it? I'm alive, I'm alive, I'm alive. And somehow when you were asking that question, that was the first thing that came. What life is worth living for my daughter, for any of us? I would want, and that doesn't have anything to do even with physical capacity or health. But if someone can feel like they are alive in this moment, that's really all I would ask. Whereas if they feel like they're, what did you say, Bonnie?
Near life, having a near life experience.
When we're having a near life experience, and if that continues and becomes the norm, then in a way you could throw it up in the air, right? So it is holding the paradox of, I want her to come back safely, and I am thrilled that she is out there being fully alive.
Wondering if we're closing. Feels like closing to me.
Yeah, I think we're moving towards a close around by 2. So, or sorry, Ria, in the next 10 minutes or so. Yeah.
I actually have to jump off right now, so I think you all.
Bye.
Yeah, I think we might be done if there's, unless somebody has something else that we could talk about, but I think that it's just it's the beginning. Maybe we can just end with one final thought, if the the high pitched people. And one of the things that I want to say that came up for me was that I've learned, and for those of you who are younger, one of the things that can happen is that you get at a certain age and you find yourself counting. Like I'll be 93 if my youngest horse dies at the age of my others. And then you say, well, I'm not going to get this. And this is not helpful. You shouldn't plan like that. You should plan as if you're going to live another 100 years without that attachment. So one of the things I just would like to leave people with is that it's, I mean, for some things, yes, it's helpful to count like what you do with your money and this and that. But in general, to limit what you start, I'm not going to start that. I'm not going to live long enough. This is not helpful. So I just would want to end with that.
I bow out. Yeah.
Thank you all for coming. This has been great.
Yeah.
Coming to, especially coming to this title is really interesting.
Fire.
Yeah. Yeah. So appreciate everyone who was here in the conversation. Mm.
I just unmuted everyone or invited you to just so people can say
Yeah,
hi.
Davey's part of
She
writing.
unmuted,
Okay.
she unmuted everyone.
I just want to say hello to Cheryl.
Hello, David. Hello, everyone. And goodbye.
Mm.
More of these sessions.
May you have a good life. May you have a good death.
That's a good one.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye from John. It was great. I enjoyed it.